And we are in Leviticus chapter 27. Leviticus chapter 27, the final chapter of Leviticus. Yes, yeah. And the final week in this 8-year-long study. No, just kidding. But we're going to have some fun today with our last message in Leviticus. Why? Because when anyone thinks of Leviticus, they immediately think fun, right? Like Leviticus and fun, they're synonymous. Those of you that have never read Leviticus, you're here for the first time, don't do it on your own. Just go listen to messages with someone else. But what we're going to do today is very unusual. We're going to I'm going to try to explain the entire book of Leviticus in about 30 minutes. I'm going to try to cover everything that we've covered in the series, and then we're going to close by looking at the final chapter, chapter 27, and what it means. Now, here's what I want to say right up front, and you've maybe learned this as you've looked at this whole thing, as you've been through this series, depending on how long you've been with us through this. In order to understand the book of Leviticus, you have to understand the story that it's a part of. The book of Leviticus is a small part of a larger story that's being told. In fact, the books of the Bible that lead up to Leviticus tell you a lot about Leviticus. In fact, it's really good for all of us to know this from a Bible standpoint, that Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, those books together, those books were given to humanity. They were given to the people of Israel at the exact same moment in time, basically. So what we have is people who have experienced the Exodus, and that's being written about. They are reading their history in Genesis and where they came from, and now they're being introduced to the book of Leviticus. So all of these things are happening at once. So are you with me on this? So they've experienced the Exodus, they're reading Genesis and sort of what preexisted that whole moment, and then they're now entering into Leviticus. So that's sort of where it fits into this larger story. So this is what people are discovering as they kind of start this journey, and as you begin Leviticus, what they've already been learning, what they've already been unpacking, is that there is this God who is unlike other gods. And by the way, whenever you draw a God, he's always got to be some glowing sort of looking thing like this. So there's a God who is not like other gods. That's what we're discovering, right? So they're learning about this God who is not like other gods, and he's forming, if you've been here for a while, a God who is not like other gods, he's forming what? A people who are not like other people, right? Some of you have been taking notes. So he's forming a people who are not like other people. And by the way, this is how I draw lots of people. And I am not an artist. So you have this God who is not like other gods, and he's got this people who are, people who are not, just in case you forgot these were people, not like others, right? Yeah. Some of you are OCD, all right? Like, I can't move on without that guy getting some arms, right? So we have a God who is not like other gods and a people who are not like other people. And the whole point of the story leading up to the book of Leviticus, Genesis and Exodus, the whole point of all of it is that this God is trying to bridge the gap between himself and humanity. This God, who is not like other gods, wants to do life with, relate to, dwell among these people. And so what you read about in Exodus is this. This God comes to these people, and he does dwell with them, and he dwells, I'm really nervous now that you guys are picky, he dwells with them in this tent. That's a tent, right? So God comes and dwells with them in this tent. So God comes and dwells on their level with them in this tent. Now this is an amazing, beautiful thing, right? This God who is coming to these people, this is unheard of. This is an exciting prospect. A God unlike other gods living among a people who are not like other people. This is brand new information, right? When this is being talked about, written about, no one has ever even thought about this sort of thing, right? This is brand new. In fact, these people, I want you to understand, the people who are receiving Leviticus, their only ideas of God, the only ideas that they had were influenced by the people around them. So the Egyptians and their mythology, that was basically their understanding of who God was. The various tribes and people groups that lived in that region, their worship of a pantheon of gods or some representation of gods, these fickle, hard-to-please gods who were very unpredictable, those were the only gods that the people of Israel were familiar with when they read Genesis, experience the Exodus, and now enter into Leviticus. They've never done this. So there is a part of this that is beautiful and wonderful, right? And which, by the way, the reason that we use the language and that the symbols are used the way they are in Leviticus is that God is entering into that cultural context. So God uses a language and uses processes and symbols that these people would understand. He uses a language that's familiar to them, like the sacrificial system. He uses that language because that's a language they knew. So he uses something they know to tell them or show them something that they'd never known or had never seen before. So God uses something they're familiar with, but turns their understanding of God completely upside down. So now they are being introduced to something they've never even imagined, nor has anyone else imagined of. So this is a beautiful thing. God is with these people. That does not mean that there aren't some challenges with this. I mean, if God is present, his presence alone would create a certain conundrum, a certain set of challenges. And so the people are introduced to this other idea, this idea that we see repeated throughout the scriptures, this idea of God's holiness. So God dwells in this tent among the people, but out of this tent radiates God's holiness. So God is holy. This word holy, it's this one word that's used throughout Leviticus that somehow captures this complex idea of God being both powerful and perfect. Holiness is this idea of there's awe and reverence around holiness. There's this sense of power, there's this sense of authority, but there's also a sense of purity. There's a sense of rightness about what's going on with God. It's like there's this sense of knowing how powerful he is and knowing how right he is, all in the same thing. So when someone says that God is holy, there's this idea of whoa, you better take God seriously because God is holy. In fact, we learn in Leviticus that this holiness thing has some implications if you don't approach God correctly. In fact, that's one of the things we discover. God's holiness creates a sort of barrier between the people that he wants to be with and himself. So even though he's come to them, even though he's dwelling among them, there is still this barrier that exists because of God's holiness. Are you with me so far? That brings us to the book of Leviticus. So Leviticus opens up, and if you're here in week 1, Leviticus opens up with this concept or this idea of Corban. Corban is the word for offering. The reason we use this is because it was more than an offering. Corban is this idea of approaching God or drawing near to God. You participate in Corban in an effort to draw near to God. So Leviticus starts with this idea. The whole purpose of Leviticus is to help deal with this barrier, to help deal with God's holiness. So in Leviticus, we see there are 3 solutions to the problem of this barrier, 3 solutions to God's holiness. The first one that we see is ritual. The second one that we see is priesthood. The third one that we see is purity. There are 3 solutions to this, 3 ways that this gets solved. Now, if you study the book of Leviticus and you look at it from a scholarly level, you discover that the book of Leviticus is broken into 7 distinct sections. These sections follow like this. There is chapters 1 to 7, 8 to 10, 11 to 15, 16 to 17. No, I'm not making this up. 18 to 20, 21 to 22, and 23 to 27, the one we'll cover today. That is how the book of Leviticus is broken up. There are these 7 distinct sections, and this is where it gets really fascinating and really interesting. Ritual, solution number 1. Each of these solutions is dealt with in 2 distinct places in the book. Ritual is dealt with in chapters 1 through 7 and 23 through 27. Priesthood is dealt with in chapters 8 through 10 and chapters 21 and 22. Purity, you guessed it, is dealt with in 11 to 15 and 18 to 20. So each of the solutions is presented in two distinct places throughout the book of Leviticus. We have ritual, priesthood, and purity. That's what this looks like. So let's talk about these. First, ritual. Ritual begins here. The first section, the first part of the first solution is all about sacrifices. It's all about animal sacrifices. This is where we were introduced to all of the blood and all of the gore and all the things that turned our stomachs several months ago when we started the series. And so the whole idea in this first section is that the people are making various sacrifices to God. They're bringing animals to an altar, making sacrifices like many of the people in that region did at that time. They're making these sacrifices for one of two reasons. They are either saying thank you to God, or they're saying, I'm sorry to God. One of those two reasons for those 5 sacrifices that we read about in those first 7 chapters. So there's ritual sacrifice that's talked about. The second part of the first solution down here at the end is also ritual, but it's ritual festivals. So we have ritual sacrifice and we have ritual festivals. These people celebrated these festivals or these feasts that each one of them pointed to something that was distinctly about their past or about their future. So they ate a meal together, and the symbols of their meal spoke to or pointed to something that they'd already gone through and reminded them of God's faithfulness, or something that would be happening in the future, and sometimes both of them. So solution number 1 is we engage in ritual, and here are 2 different ways that we engage in ritual to solve this issue of God's holiness. That's the first solution. Second solution is the priesthood. Being directly in God's presence is problematic. And we see that in the book of Leviticus. In fact, we see what happens when people are around God's presence in an inappropriate sort of way. And so we are introduced in the first section of the second solution to the idea of a priesthood. The priests are these specially appointed, special representatives of the people who will enter into this place to be with God on behalf of the people. So in the first section of the first half, we read, of the second solution, we read about the priests being ordained or being confirmed, being selected. We see their apparel. It's where we learned about Aaron standing naked in front of the whole congregation. This whole thing, we learn about that in these chapters. It's their selection, their confirmation, their ordination. In the second half of the second solution, we read about their public life. If these special representatives are going to enter into God's presence and represent the people to God, then it was idealistic that these people would somehow live a different sort of life. And so we read in chapters 21 and 22 about the different sort of life that the priests are supposed to live on behalf of the people. So 2 sections with that one. The third solution has to do with purity and the purity laws. Now, the first section of the purity laws, the first section of the third solution, this part, it really dealt with the whole idea of being clean or unclean, or pure or impure. That was the whole idea behind this first section. And in this first part, on the surface, it's sort of a hard thing for us to understand. In fact, when we walked through that, that was sort of a weird thing. Like, how in the world are we going to get something from all of these purity laws? Like, what does this mean? When you see it on the surface, it's confusing, but when we understood the depths of this, we realized that there was much more going on. People, in their way of relating to the gods at this time, it was a very insecure sort of place. Nobody ever knew where they stood with God. There was always confusion about how God or the gods felt about you. So what we see happening in this time period is people living insecure lives towards God. So what people are now experiencing, what the people of Israel are experiencing, is something new and different. This is a God who actually says, well, here's when you are clean and unclean. Here's when you're pure and impure. I'm going to make it clear so that you don't live in this insecurity. I'm going to help you so you guys don't keep living like everybody else around you. Somehow, in his brilliance in this, God also communicates health principles to these people that now, thousands of years later, we look at and go, well, that was a pretty good idea. They definitely should have stopped eating that stuff. Right? So he does this amazing stuff alongside of that, brilliant things, but the biggest lesson that we learn in the first half of the third solution is that this is a God who is always associated with life, not death. And that was the main point of that. That God is a God of life, not a God of death, and he's constantly associating himself with that which gives life and does not bring death. Now, the second section to the third solution deals with the purity of the people, but not as individuals as much as it does with their public life. So in this second section, this is where we learn about social justice. This is where we learn about relationships and healthy relating to one another. This is where we learn about sexuality. This is where we learn all sorts of things that define a healthy life. That's what's defined here. So it's private purity, and then it's public purity. Those are the solutions, right? So we have ritual, priesthood, and purity, and this is all under this idea of drawing near to this God who is holy. Now, if you're astute, you've probably noticed that there's something being left out here, right? Probably realized that this section we haven't talked about yet. Chapter 16 and 17. Chapter 16 and 17 gives us the Day of Atonement. Now, what do we learn about the Day of Atonement? Quick little recap of this. At this point in Israel's history, this crew of people is quite large. And there's sort of a general principle that when you get a large group of people together, there is a large possibility of mayhem and mischief. Are you with me? Like, just go to a college campus and you'll see what I'm talking about, right? Get a bunch of people together and there can be a lot of things that happen, right? So there's this idea that the people, they've done things, right? They've done things to offend God's holiness. They've done things to really make this barrier very aware to themselves. They've done things, so now they've kind of realized there's this separation. How can we ever enter into God's holiness? So God gives them this middle thing right here, the Day of Atonement. What's the Day of Atonement? Well, the priest would have this annual, this year, once a year celebration where he would gather all of the people of Israel together and they would bring out 2 goats. Some of you are here for this, so you already know this, but they would bring out 2 goats. The first goat, the priest would slit the throat of that goat and then sacrifice it on the altar. And it sounds bloody and gruesome, but when you move to chapter 17 explains what's going on in chapter 16, and it says that the blood carries the life of an individual, that blood is representative of life. And the whole idea that's being painted behind this picture of this first goat is that when that goat's blood is spilled, that goat is being a substitute for what these people deserve. So God says, I'm going to give you a symbol and say, this is something else that's happening. You are not being sacrificed, but this goat is instead of you. So there's this substitution that happens for this goat. That leaves the other goat. The other goat is the scapegoat. Some of you know that language. Some of you have been called that, or you've called other people that. But the priest would lay his hands on the goat, and he would confess all of the sins of the people of Israel with his hands on the head of that goat. So they were there a very long time, right? Because there's a lot of people, and a lot of people do a lot of mischievous things. So he confesses their sins, and then there's this second symbolic picture that's painted. They take that goat, and they send it out in the wilderness to never be seen again. So God says to these people, I know you feel separated from me because of your brokenness, but I'm just going to tell you how this relationship really looks. There's something else that has paid your penalty, and I have forgiven your sins. I don't even see them. They've wandered off into the wilderness. What is God doing with this middle section? What's happening here? God is giving these people a concrete way of understanding and knowing where they stand with God. This is a clear statement of where you stand. You wonder where you stand? Well, once a year we do this huge thing so that we all know this is how God sees us and this is how we see him. It is a clear statement of where they stand with God. And notice where it sits in the story. Right in the middle, right? See, Leviticus does not just simply present a solution. Leviticus tells a story, and in the middle of this story is this thing called the Day of Atonement, where God says, this is how I feel about you. Let me just say this. Leviticus was revolutionary when it landed in the hands of these primitive people. It may sometimes seem regressive and primitive to you, but it was absolutely revolutionary. But not only was it revolutionary because of the solution, but the story that this is telling is absolutely mind-blowing. This whole thing is telling a story. And let me just show you this. Let's come back to the tent. The tent. The word tent. The idea of a tent. In ancient literature, and among ancient Hebrews and among ancient Christians, the word tent has been synonymous with the human body. Our physical bodies are called a tent, which makes total sense, right? Because we have a soul, we have the spirit that is in this thing. And we know that there's this distinction from this body that holds this soul, this spirit. We know they're not all the same thing. And so the body was called by these ancient people a tent. Like we live in these tents. Our souls are residing in this sort of temporary structure. That's the way they thought about the human body. So let's go back to what we're looking at here. A God who comes down in a tent. So what could this be pointing to? Jesus, right? Jesus, God comes in the form of a body. God comes to us in a tent, in physical form. But even though Jesus comes, we still have this issue of our brokenness, right? We still have this issue of being just people who get into mischief, right? There's still, even though God is with us, there's still this necessary need for us to connect with him in some other sort of way. So what are the solutions that are presented to us in Leviticus? Ritual, priesthood, and purity. God wants something to happen with us, and the solution is ritual, priesthood, and purity. And so what does Jesus do? Jesus becomes the ritual on the cross. Jesus resolves the ritual. In fact, in AD 70, the Romans, they destroy the temple of Israel. They tear the entire thing down. They've had it with the people of Israel. They destroy the temple. And from that point forward, the worship of God in the temple, the worship of God through this sacrificial system has never happened again. It's been obsolete shortly after Jesus fulfilled it on a cross. So Jesus satisfies the ritual. And what about the priesthood? We need somebody to represent us before God. And who does that? Again, it's Jesus. What does Jesus do? He's the fulfillment of the priesthood. It's why the writer of the New Testament book of Hebrews, he constantly refers to Jesus as the ultimate high priest. Why? Because Jesus represented us before God like no other priest had ever represented us before. So Jesus resolves the ritual. Jesus resolves the priesthood, which now leaves this whole idea of purity, right? You realize that in the New Testament, there's this word that is used to describe Christ followers. It is a word hagios. The Greek word hagios means holy. We are called holy because of the work that Jesus did for us. Over and over again, the early Christian church, they camped on this idea that you and I are made holy. We are made pure by Jesus. Jesus is the one that makes us pure. So we draw near to God through Jesus. Are you with me so far? Nod your head if you're with me, at least like 3 of you. Okay. Sometimes I feel like a mad scientist. So, Jesus is pure, and he makes us pure. Which I want you to hold on to something for a minute, because we're going to come back to it. If Jesus makes us pure, Jesus makes us holy, right? Jesus makes us holy. You and I, defined by Jesus, are holy. Hold on to that, because we're going to come back to it in just a minute. But first, I want you to notice something about this book. Could it be that this first half of this book describes life before Jesus, life before the cross? And could it be that this, in the center, not just of this story, but of human history, is this? And we have BC and AD, right? Could it be that this is this, and it is a foreshadowing of what is to come? Leviticus is telling us a story. Think about this. Think about this. Think about what happens after this. Think about what happens after the cross, and think about what happens in here. Think about the things that take place. There's this shift that happens inside of humanity. These people become a different sort of people as they begin to live on the other side of this, right? They become a different people because God has come to them, right? They are shaped by knowing God. When you know God, God begins to shape you. And then as you begin to be shaped by God, you begin to live differently, right? And if you look at the content of what they're being called to and how they're supposed to live, when you see that they're being called to live with justice and mercy and peace and to be a different kind of people, you realize they are living the heart of God towards humanity, to the people around them. You see that there's this beautiful thing. They are becoming something else. They are becoming a people who are not like other people. This whole story, this whole thing is pointing to this larger story, this larger idea that these people are becoming something and we become something on this side of the cross. All of that now brings us to chapter 27. Chapter 27 is sort of an addendum or an appendix to the book of Leviticus. It's really interesting, but scholars pretty unanimously recognize that chapter 26 is kind of the end of the book, but then there's chapter 27, which was like, but we got to say one more thing, right? So what is chapter 27 all about? What does it add on to? Chapter 27 is about what people need to do when they want to give back to God. Not the sort of giving that they did up here in drawing near to God, not the sacrifices that they made, but a sort of generosity towards God. It's talking about how they become generous towards God. What do they do when they want to be generous towards God? Which, right in this whole idea, I think there's a beautiful thing that God is planting in Leviticus for us. God gives to us, okay? This is the whole idea, that God comes to us, God gives to us, God is generous towards us, and then there is something that happens to us and something that reforms us. It reforms who we are. And then in the final chapter of Leviticus, God is inviting them to enter into this mutually generous relationship. There is a relationship of generous mutuality that God is inviting the people into. I want you to enter into the same sort of giving relationship with me that I've had with you. We are going to live generously towards one another. I have given of myself to you, and you are going to give of yourself to me. By the way, humans, we always express love and appreciation through gifts. It's like a universal thing. Valentine's Day is coming up, guys. Some of the guys are like, oh yeah, good idea, write that down. It's the first note you've written today, Valentine's Day. Yeah, because I want to avoid death. Valentine's Day is coming up, and what do? We buy gifts, right? We buy gifts because we want to show love and appreciation. Giving back is how we show love. It's how we show respect. It's how we show appreciation, right? We give gifts. So chapter 27, I love this. This is so beautiful. Chapter 27, this whole thing is like God saying, I believe in you. I believe in you. I believe that when you see this thing, when you see who I am, and when you see who you're becoming, even with your brokenness, when you see this, there is going to be something that happens inside of you, and your lives are going to be changed, and you are going to feel something. There is going to be a way that you feel towards me, and you are going to want to give back to me. You are going to want to feel, you're going to feel something, and you're going to want to give something tangible to what I feel towards you. So chapter 27 outlines how you would do that. But in a very subversive way, what God is saying is this. You're going to get this. Like, I believe you guys are going to see me and you're going to get this. And when you do, when you see, your eyes are going to be opened and you'll see things you never saw before. And your hearts are going to be opened and they are going to pump with a life that they have never pumped like before. Like, there's something that's going to happen and you're going to want to give back to me. And there's this mind-blowing concept embedded in all of this. There's an idea being planted in Leviticus 27. This idea that what the people gave would eventually make the tent bigger. So there's this connection. What the people start giving as a result of Leviticus chapter 27 has a direct impact on the size of the tent. So later on, when the Jews arrive in Jerusalem, they choose to build a temple. And this temple becomes one of the greatest wonders ever built with human hands. It is massive. It is one of the first massive structures ever to sit on this planet. It is this beautiful, ornate, gorgeous building that is a testament to God's presence. It is expansive, and there's this message being sent, not just to the people of Israel, but to all the world, that God is with us and God is big. So when you give back to God, it expands his tent. Now, in a way, what God is saying is this. When you enter into this whole thing with him, when you enter into this mutually generous relationship with God, when he lives towards you and you live towards him in the same way, when you do this, when you and I get this, what God is saying is this: my presence expands to new places. How does it expand? Check this out. The tent is associated with God's holiness, right? And what did Jesus make us? He made us holy, which means we now carry this holiness. The picture that's being painted in the second half of Leviticus is where you and I live, where you and I live our lives out, where we work and where we play, where we eat and where we drink. All of those places where our feet go, we bring the holiness of God, and the footprint of his presence is brought to places that it had never been brought to before. Are you with me in this? When you and I begin to live towards God in a generous way, when we begin to live our lives open to him, we begin to carry him into the places where we live our life. That's the picture that's being painted. So this is why Jesus would look at his disciples and he would say, the kingdom of God is at hand. It's right in front of you. Like, this is the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is now. You bring the kingdom to all of these places. Is this not a beautiful picture? I don't know about you, but when I see something like this in this obscure sliver of this ancient book, and then I think about Jesus saying something like this to me and all of us in the room: love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your mind, and all of your strength. In other words, live generously towards God. When I think about Jesus saying that to me in light of this, I'm just like, yeah. I think I can believe in this God, right? I think I can trust you. I think there's something that happens to my faith, and I become really generous with my life when I see who God really is. Amen? This is God's heart towards us. There is a God who is not like other gods, and he is forming us, you and I. He's forming us into a people who are not like other people because of the cross of Jesus Christ. That's the story. Will you stand with me? May you have a lifelong love of the book of Leviticus. No, just kidding. May you be men and women who know this God who is not like other gods. And may you be a people who are not like other people. And may you stretch the borders of God's presence into the places where you eat and drink and laugh and play and learn and grow and work. Amen. Amen. Love you guys so much. Thanks for being here. Thanks for putting up with me through this series. We'll see you guys next week. See you later.